Hey everyone and welcome back. Ready for another deep dive? This one is pretty intense. It all starts with a pretty normal situation, right? Imagine you're heading home after a night out, maybe a little late.
Yeah.
You're just the passenger though, not even driving. Everything seems fine, totally normal. Then, bam, those flashing lights in the rear view. Ugh, a traffic stop. Happens to the best of us, am I right?
Yeah, that sinking feeling, right?
Totally. But here's the thing. For Jane Doe, this routine traffic stop, it turned into something else entirely. Like seriously scary. It could have put her behind bars for like a decade.
10 years, wow.
10 years, I know, right? So that's what we're going to unpack today. We've got excerpts from this Boston True Crime podcast, specifically an episode called Pod 11, Framed and Facing 10 Years, How Jane Doe Escaped a Life-Changing Sentence.
And, it's interesting. This all went down in Fall River, Massachusetts, which doesn't really have the same, big city vibe as Boston.
Right.
But it just goes to show this kind of thing can happen anywhere. Absolutely. It's that reminder that no matter where you are, things can go sideways fast.
And the podcast makes it super clear that Jane Doe, she's just a regular person, like anyone listening. Out with a friend, trying to get home.
It makes you think, It could be any one of us.
Exactly. It really makes you think. So, okay, here's the scene. It's a cold night, Jane's in the passenger seat, and boom, they get pulled over. Seems pretty standard at first.
Broken taillight, maybe. Speeding.
Yeah, something like that. But then things start to shift.
Like, what do you mean?
Well, the podcast describes how the officers, their whole demeanor changes. It goes from routine questions to this intense, almost accusatory tone.
Yeah, I've heard stories like that.
And it gets even crazier. They smash her window, drag her out of the car, and just start tearing it apart. Imagine that. You're just sitting there, and suddenly your window's gone.
It's terrifying to even think about, the feeling of being totally powerless.
Right. And that's kind of the scary part, how quickly a normal interaction can turn into something, well, not normal.
Yeah, and that power dynamic between a citizen and law enforcement, it's delicate,
Absolutely. And here's where it takes this whole other turn.
Yeah.
So they're searching the car, right? And the officers, they claim they found over 200 grams of cocaine hidden in the center console.
200 grams, that's a lot.
Right. And that puts Jane in a really bad spot, legally speaking. We're talking a serious drug trafficking charge. And in Massachusetts, that carries a mandatory minimum sentence of 10 years.
10 years, just like that.
Yeah. It's hard to even wrap your head around that.
And a mandatory minimum, that means no matter what, the judge has to give at least that much time.
Exactly. And that's why this whole case is so important, I think. It shows how sometimes the system doesn't really consider all the details, the individual circumstances, or, the possibility that someone might be innocent.
Right. It makes you question, is the punishment always fitting the crime?
Yeah, exactly. And that brings us to Jane. She's facing this huge legal battle. Scared, confused, and most importantly, she's innocent.
So what happens next?
Well, she needs someone in her corner, right? Someone who believes her, who's willing to fight. And that's when she finds this lawyer, Attorney Veronica White. Have you heard of her?
Veronica White. Yeah, the name rings a bell. She's got quite a reputation, right?
Oh, totally. She's known for taking on tough cases, really fighting for her clients, really goes after the truth.
Sounds like Jane found the right person then.
Yeah, it's almost like something out of a movie. The underdog facing these impossible odds.
And then, bam, the hero lawyer enters the scene.
Exactly. Except this isn't a movie. It's real life with very real stakes.
So what did Veronica do? How did she approach this case?
Well, she met with Jane, listened to her whole story, and then she got to work. Really digging into everything, the police reports, the evidence, all of it.
And most importantly, she believed Jane.
Yeah, that belief was huge. That willingness to fight for someone who felt totally powerless,
It's like in that moment, Veronica became Jane's lifeline.
Exactly. And that belief, that's where things started to turn around for Jane.
So how did Veronica plan to fight this?
Well, she realized the key was the search. How the police searched the car. She thought they'd gone too far, that they'd violated Jane's rights. Specifically, her Fourth Amendment rights.
The Fourth Amendment, that's the one about unreasonable searches and seizures, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting. So Veronica's going after how they got the evidence in the first place.
Yep. So Veronica files this thing called a motion to dismiss. Basically, she's arguing that the cocaine, the evidence they supposedly found, it can't be used against Jane in court.
Because of the way they found it.
Right, because she believes the cops got it illegally. And if the evidence is no good, then the whole case falls apart, right?
Makes sense. But that's got to be a risky move, challenging the police like that.
Totally. It's a huge gamble. It could either set Jane free or, well, things could get worse.
So what happens in court?
Okay, so the podcast, it actually takes us right into the courtroom. You can feel the tension. Veronica, she delivers this powerful argument, like really meticulously pointing out all the flaws in the prosecution's case.
Highlighting how they violated Jane's rights.
Exactly. It's like this classic showdown, the power of the state versus the rights of an individual.
So last we left off, things weren't looking so good for Jane. It was all coming down to this, right? Would the judge side with her or, well,
It really makes you think about how our system works, Everyone deserves a fair chance, a real chance to defend themselves, no matter what they're accused of.
Right, innocent until proven guilty, all that. But let's be real, when you're up against serious charges like this, it can feel impossible.
Totally. And for Jane, it was like she had this mountain to climb. The charges, the potential sentence, the whole power of the prosecution, it's a lot.
Absolutely. But hey, at least she had Veronica in her corner, right? That's got to count for something.
Oh, for sure. Veronica's strategy, focusing on how the police did the search, that was a gutsy move.
Yeah, putting the spotlight right on them, on their actions. And the thing is, our legal system, it's all about balance. The police, they have power, right? But that power has limits. They can't just do whatever they want.
Right. They got to follow the rules, respect people's rights, like that Fourth Amendment that Veronica was talking about.
Exactly. No unreasonable searches. That's the whole point.
And that's exactly what Veronica argued, that the officers, they overstepped, that they didn't respect Jane's rights.
Can you imagine being in that courtroom? The tension must have been thick, waiting for the judge to make a decision.
Oh, totally. I mean, this wasn't just about Jane anymore, was it? This was about, like, the bigger picture, making sure the police, they're held accountable, that they can't just, do whatever they want.
Right, setting a precedent, making sure the rules are followed.
And then finally, the judge, he announces his decision.
Drum roll, please.
He ruled in Jane's favor, said the search was illegal, that the evidence, the cocaine, it couldn't be used against her.
Get out of here.
I know, right? And just like that, the charges, they're dismissed. Case closed.
What a relief that must have been for Jane, for Veronica, like a weight lifted.
Seriously. It's proof that even when it seems like you're up against, like, the whole system, one person, the right lawyer, can make all the difference.
It really shows the power of a good lawyer. They're like the shield between you and, well, everything when you're in that kind of trouble.
This whole thing, it makes you think about those mandatory minimum sentences, too. Like, what if the judge had been forced to give Jane 10 years no matter what? Just because of how much cocaine they said they found.
Yeah, and remember, she wasn't even involved in any drug dealing, right? She was just a passenger.
Exactly. These mandatory minimums, sometimes they just don't fit. It's like using, I don't know, a giant hammer for a tiny nail.
Sometimes you need a more precise tool, right? Something that considers all the details, all the nuances.
In Jane's case, it's a perfect example of that. If the judge had to follow that mandatory minimum, she'd be in prison right now for something she didn't even do.
It's scary to think about.
So, okay, we know Jane's free. But what about, like, after the trial? Did the podcast say what happened to her, how she's doing now?
They didn't really go into detail, probably to protect her privacy, which, totally understandable. They just said she's, like, rebuilding her life, trying to, get past all of this.
Yeah, I get that. After everything she went through, she deserves some peace.
But still, you got to wonder about the impact, right? The stress, the legal fees, how this whole thing affected her life.
It's like, even when the system works, even when justice prevails, there's still a cost. So here we are, the final part of our deep dive into Jane Doe's story.
Man, what a story, huh? It's amazing how quickly things can go from a normal traffic stop to, like, facing serious prison time.
It's mind-boggling, and it really makes you think about, the system and how it works, or doesn't work sometimes.
Right. Like, Jane's lucky she had Veronica in her corner. Without her, who knows what would have happened.
Seriously, Veronica, she pulled back the curtain, showed us what can happen when things go wrong. And it makes you wonder, right? How many other people are out there going through something similar, but they don't have a Veronica fighting for them?
Probably more than we realize. It's a reminder that we all need to know our rights. Be aware of what's going on.
Absolutely. Speaking of rights, can we talk about those mandatory minimum sentences again? Jane was, like, this close to getting hit with a 10-year sentence.
Right.
just because of that cocaine, even though she didn't even know it was there.
It's crazy, right? The judge's hands would have been tied. No room for, like, considering the details, the fact that she was innocent.
Yeah, like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. It just doesn't work sometimes.
We need a system that's more flexible, that looks at each case individually, not just like throwing the book at everyone.
So as we wrap up, what are the big takeaways from all this? What should people remember from Jane's story?
Well, first off, know your rights. Like, seriously, look them up. Understand what the police can and can't do.
Right, knowledge is power.
Yeah.
Especially when you're dealing with, law enforcement.
And if you ever find yourself in trouble, get a good lawyer. Don't try to go it alone.
A good lawyer can make all the difference, that's for sure. Anything else?
Yeah, remember that Jane story. It's not just some isolated incident. This kind of stuff happens all the time.
It's a reminder that the system, it's not perfect. And sometimes it's up to us to speak up, to fight for what's right.
Exactly. We all have a role to play in making things better.
Well said. And on that note, thanks for joining us for this deep dive. It's been intense but important. Jane's story, it's a reminder that even when things look bad, there's always hope, and that we all have the power to make a difference.
The names and certain details in this podcast have been changed to protect the privacy of the individuals involved. While the cases presented are based upon real events, certain facts may have been altered or omitted for confidentiality purposes. Each case is inspired by real legal cases defended by White & Associates PC. This podcast is intended for educational and informational purposes only and should not be construed as legal advice. Any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, is purely coincidental. White & Associates PC does not endorse or guarantee the accuracy or completeness of the information discussed in this episode.